Thanks, Trevor. I added an item on the agenda because I got a question a couple of times this week. Why am I participating here with Sid? So in very short, the reason why I'm participating with Sid is I won the Values Award, GitLab Values Award at Contribute 2019 for iteration. And this year's winner, so 2020, James Ramsey, is in Australian time zone, which makes it really inconvenient for him to participate. So I'm hoping to discuss things with Sid and with all of you others in the call as well, and make this useful for all of us. I hope to learn more as well about iteration, because there is always something to be learned. Lindsay, your item is first.
So my topic is based on a planning breakdown kind of question I've had in my head. We've been working on a big set of epics around redesigning the 3 levels of security dashboards that we support within the Threat Insights group. So we have the group level, the project level, and the instance level. And we received 3 design issues from our UX counterpart, and we use those as the basis for our epics, basically. And then within each of those epics, the team broke down implementation issues based on that. So to jump right into Sid's questions, because everyone can read what I wrote here. I don't understand the first one, Sid.
Do you know that we're working on instance groups? Instance groups are kind of a special group that encompass every group on the instance, every root namespace on the instance is a subgroup of the instance group. So it's a way for us to make sure that we don't have to duplicate functionality. Now, a lot of functionality ends up in the administrator instance dashboard and at the group level. If we have an instance group, we can move all that administrator stuff just to a regular group, and we don't have to design the interface twice.
That's news to me. I wasn't aware of all that. So, going forward, that could change how we, separate our dashboards and, how we offer these to customers. Right now, the instance level is available, across the whole set of projects that you have access to, and it's up at the top menu. So we're looking to change that as part of, these are mostly front end work, right? So we're mostly just separating the vulnerability list, so the list of the results that you see from your scanners from the widgets or charts that we display in the dashboard. So project status over time, your report card, those types of things. So to give that sort of dashboard experience. So our work has really been around the navigational changes that are required to split those 2 elements, as well as a set of enhancements to the vulnerability list. The vulnerability list is already shared across all 3 of these dashboards. So we didn't want to recreate that work under each epic. So part of the challenge was, how do we consolidate those implementation issues, but still provide visibility into them? People would go and look for, the vulnerability list work under, say, the group level dashboard epic, and it wasn't there because it had been defined under the project level dashboard. I might have those examples mixed up, but you get the idea.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and I think if you ask like, hey, which one should go first, I would say group first. We have too much on the project already, so dump stuff under group, and then instance would be last, because we're going to replace that with a group instance. And I like to see that sooner rather than later. I'm pushing in the product scaling call. Like, hey, we say GitLab.com is enterprise ready, but we keep releasing all these instance features first without having it on the group level. We should really put a stop to that.
Quick second part question of, when we are being successful at iteration by breaking things down small, we do run into challenges both with how we announce this to our customers. We end up with these tiny little bits in the release post when really we're working towards one big larger goal. And if anyone has advice to that, and it also results in a lot of additional overhead around screenshot updates, because we are making a lot of front-end UI changes. So any advice on that when you're really embracing iteration?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have solutions. One suggestion is that I'd love overview posts. So if you have a clear vision at the start, you can have a blog post that you reference every time you announce something. You can refer to that bigger vision from the release post. And then when you're done, you can also have something that kind of on our blog that gets promoted separately, like, and don't be afraid to say GitLab releases, even though like you've already released it over many small releases. The best example I have, I used to build submarines, and we had the front page of the national newspaper, and there we were with the submarine. We're like, this is never going to happen again. But guess what? If it's good news, we got on the front page again the next year and again the next year. So it doesn't matter. Just say it's new. We don't have to be shy about that. So you can kind of the release date and the launch date can be different. You can just pretend GitLab just launched XYZ, even though we have an 15 release post before that. Nobody particularly cares about that. And then for the screenshots, big problem. In an ideal world, screenshots would self-update in the documentation. That is, however, tricky. So that would take someone to get very excited about that and start doing that. And we've not found the person yet, but if there's 56 people in this call, consider this a solicitation for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have two more questions. Something is called a security center, I think, in the instance level, and then it's a security dashboard when it's on the group level. Are those the same things?
That's a very recent renaming of the instance level security dashboard to security center. So I misspoke there, or I guess cast my verbiage kind of broadly, but yeah, they are the same thing.
Okay. I'd suggest calling them the same thing. I think it's confusing to the end user to have the same functionality with different names.
And that's a really good point. I think that is the plan, but Matt Wilson will weigh in on that.
Cool, thanks. And then,
thank you.
And then you also had something like, we make a dashboard, we make configuration screen and a list screen. How's a list screen different than a dashboard screen? My sort of understanding of a dashboard is it's a list of stuff with filters.
Sure. So the list is really just a standalone vulnerability list today, whereas the dashboard is a page that just shows charts and overviews today. You can view this today up on the instance level dashboard or the group level. We're still working on the project level because we are adding a new chart in order to create that dashboard experience because there didn't exist.
It's basically graphs versus logs.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for having the first item. Appreciate it. Craig, you have the next one.
I do. Yeah, I was just curious, and I'm speaking for Dylan here, who is fast asleep in the APAC time zone. So what are your thoughts on the ongoing discussion in the MR where Dylan had pushed forth explaining the challenges of horizontal slicing of MRs and how to ensure context is included? And I've added some more detail there below if you hadn't read it previously.
Yeah, I might misunderstand, but what I think I'm seeing is like someone says, hey, I got a lot of work to do and I'm going to ship iterations. And there's this graph in this comic in our handbook, like the way to split things up is not to ship first the wheels and then the doors and then the engine and then the rest of the car. The way is first ship a skateboard and then a bicycle, etc. And the point of that is it has to be functional in every iteration. And I think the slicing that's done horizontally, maybe a bit crude, but it's like shipping a human in horizontal slices, you don't get something functional. So let's not do that. I think if something doesn't add, basically if there's no docs with the new functionality for people, then we should decline it. So every MR should have a docs update with it. There's no docs, basically it shouldn't get merged. It doesn't meet our definition of done. So the way to get there is to reduce scope. And that's what we have this call for. That's super hard. So I'd be happy to discuss that. But it's not acceptable to ship something that doesn't add value. And if it adds value, you probably want to communicate that. It should probably have docs as a part of that.
I think it's worth highlighting there are a couple of challenges that also need to be resolved in this case. So working in a merge request that has database changes, front-end changes, back-end changes, and docs gets really unwieldy really fast. So it's really hard to ship even like a small scope feature within GitLab with so many participants in the MR. And I think that is one of the reasons why we have this group division per merge request. So you will not going to split database with backend changes, but you are likely to separate front-end changes from backend changes and documentation from all of that separately, because there are too many people changing too many things at the same time. So collaboration becomes really difficult. And I think that was the original intention of these smaller merge requests that don't necessarily have the skateboard in them. So how do we resolve that? We should be able to be a really good collaborative tool for many people to work at the same time, but that doesn't seem to be currently the case. It's not questioned directly only to Sid, like there are other participants in the call.
Yeah, but my opinion is like, look, if it gets unwieldy because there's lots of people making lots of comments, like reduce scope. So you still have multiple people, but you get fewer comments.
I think for me personally, I like that the wording has changed to more guidelines and ensuring context. It was a little more prescriptive previously, and it still calls out that these are guidelines. There are going to be some real world cases where you do almost need to split them up horizontally. The partitioning work that the database team is doing right now is the case that comes to mind. We have been able to enable partitioning behind the scenes, but we're waiting for the functionality on the front end to be able to actually start using that efficiently within our product. So there are, and the wording has been changed to reflect this, there are going to be cases where horizontal splitting still makes sense. But this just encourages folks to think about providing all of the context available in the MR so that the reviewers don't have to bounce around and they only have a small piece of the entire change. And to Sid's point, it adds value.
Yeah, and I when someone says behind the scenes or backstage, my neck hairs pitch up a little bit. So why behind the scenes? Even though it hasn't been enabled yet, you can still make the docs update about how partitioning works and that it's part of the product. And even feel free to reference the future iteration. But you shouldn't hide the fact that it's now shipping as part of the product. So I think not having a docs update is really kind of a red signal to me. And the docs update can be like, look, this is not active yet. I'm cool with that, but I think not documenting what you do, shipping the docs separately is really weird. The docs describe what your code does. Like otherwise the reviewer has to read your code and guess that you intended the code to be that. Like the proper way to review something is this is what I intended and this is the code. Otherwise there's no way to check what you're shipping.
Yeah, so in the example that I used, it's all the documentation is there and we're pointing to it and it's all publicly available. You can understand and read what we did to enable partitioning, but the front end needs to actually start using the key that is part of the partitioning for it to work properly. And we're just waiting to connect those last two on the last MR.
I'm cool with that.
Okay.
I think the example of shipping, I think like no MR should ship without docs. That would be my point. And shipping the docs separately is kind of like, it's really dysfunctional.
Okay, then a challenge with that I see is that there are many guidelines with our docs on how to write them. It requires a specific review by tech writers, and that has caused delays previously with things that we shipped.
Thanks for bringing that up. And I've said that before. I think that should not be a blocking change. We can only have a few blocking changes. And in GitLab, there's security in the database and they should never be docs. And we should stop that. And if you ship docs and you haven't complied, you can fix that later. So docs would be a fix forward. And if people don't comply with that, we need their managers to tell them. But docs should never hold up the merging of code that is dysfunctional because every minute code isn't merged. There's merge conflicts developing, and it's more work. So the docs team holding up the docs, it is making the docs worse because now you're going to have docs that get written later that are not as correct, etc. So it's an anti-pattern. We should think of docs are continuous improvement. The docs that are with the merge request already improve the state of the docs. So instead of aiming for perfect, it should be like, does it make the docs better? Obviously it does. So, okay, you can merge it. It's not making anything worse. And then it's great that we have guidelines for the docs and we can do that afterwards. So maybe the way to do that is to have tag it with docs cleanup and you need to fix it later. But don't hold up the merge of code because of the docs, because otherwise we're going to split the docs and it's very predictable what will happen. The code review is harder because there's no docs to compare it to. So we ship worse code, plus some people are never going to update the docs because we can enforce that.
If I may vocalize point M, I'm fully supportive of this, just setting expectations that this will affect some of the pipeline costs because we've broken out backend pipelines and doc pipelines. So if we do this, then there will be parallel pipelines for docs on all the changes. So that may also affect the measurements of cost per MR that we're looking at, but supportive of this and setting expectation that we will anticipate this happening if this is the path we're moving towards.
Yeah, and I think we should invest in automation. Like if the only update is to the docs, we shouldn't retest the whole thing. So not only should we look like files in the MR, but also to what's updated in the MR.
Yep. Thank you, Sid. Supportive of that.
Cool. Thanks for the conversation. I'm putting this on the PM and engineering agenda as well. If someone can, well, I'll copy paste it myself later on. Alexander, you have point 5.
Sid, if I may, sorry, I had a last minute point before I move on. Is that okay?
Yep.
This is probably to Marin, because he mentioned the collaboration on the merge request when you have several threads ongoing of reviews. And being in source code, I'm curious, is there any particular feature that the group thinks that could be useful in us building? And I'll just add that we're currently working on the reviewers, which is a separate entity from assignees, that we can start building more directed features into this use case. So if you have any ideas, let us know.
But from my use of merge requests, where things become really difficult to do is when people use interchangeably threads with direct comments, right? So you have line comments in the code, but you also have comments in the merge request. So that kind of separates the discussions. Then you have different people focusing on different parts of the code, and that all is like when you look at the merge request top down, it's a timeline, right? Like it doesn't really show you what is currently happening. So you have to like sometimes scroll quite a lot further down to actually see changes. And yes, you have buttons to jump to, but that might not be super obvious. There are like many things that I think we get as a benefit from Google Docs with the real-time changes that we can't really necessarily do with merge requests right now. And I can't think of a feature right now, but there is, it's efficient to go through some, let's say, more visited merge requests, more active merge requests to see how that gets challenging, especially when you have different topics within the same merge request, meaning database changes, backend, front-end, and so on, where you as a, let's say, front-ender will not necessarily care about all of the changes that are happening on the database review, for example. So that makes it harder over time, like when things, when you take like a day or two of work on it, it becomes really hard to do and follow.
Thank you. I'll create an issue and link here in the agenda if somebody else has any other ideas later, if that's okay.
Cool. I have the next point. Sorry, I will not be turning my video on. I have some technical difficulties. Basically, I have to give some context, I'm working in the security center, the vulnerability list. So right now, if one goes to any of the levels to the vulnerability list, there is a filter by scanner, DAST, SAST, dependency scanning, etc. So, and you can filter the vulnerabilities out by that. The issue I'm working on is making that dynamic. So if a client has a third-party scanner that they've brought in, now that, white source, SAST or whatever, and they can filter specifically by that third party and just get that third party's SAST or DAST scanning and not include GitLab's vulnerabilities that are found by GitLab scanners. And so I'm having a little bit of trouble iterating on it because the UI is not changing much. There was a little bit, but it is basically adding a header and separating those choices out in the dropdown. And the backend didn't change much. It's sort of just bringing some queries got updated and I'm bringing that data. But the bulk of the change was sort of updating essentially like the data model in the front end and like making the flow of data work for this new information. And there's some additional information. And so it was hard to iterate because it felt like everything needed to change at the same time. And it felt like there was many ways to do it. And so I was like iterating with another engineer on sort of the best way to do this. And that sort of led to many iterations, but like, I don't know. Do you have any suggestions for scenarios like this where it feels like everything needs to change at once, where like sort of the entire architecture needs to change and one thing won't work without the rest of it?
Would it have been possible to implement the GraphQL API, but still have the old interface?
Yeah, great question. So that was possible. We were able to do that, and I was able to bring the GraphQL queries into the front end in separate MR so that I could access those easily. So yeah, that is one way we have iterated on this thus far.
Okay, so you first changed the API and then added the new functionality to the front end.
Correct.
Cool. I don't see any possibilities to split it up even further. What about you, Marin?
No, I was looking at this earlier. I cannot see anything. I was thinking possibly reducing the number of how's it called? Like defining the data structure first, merging that independently, but that you already said you did that basically. So I can't think of anything. It's just a big change.
Yeah, if I look at the MR 40890, I do have the feeling that it got shipped with both the new. Oh, that's just the filters and not the GraphQL change, probably.
Yeah, there are some files. You're seeing some GraphQL files probably on the left-hand side. I had made some spelling errors in the initial merge where I wasn't using them. I was just preparing to use them. And so those are just one-liners to update them so they work properly. But yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for that. And pretty cool change, by the way. This is driving a lot of value for GitLab. Like security by itself is selling ultimate, and that's more than 20% of our revenue. So thanks for this. Greg, you have the next one.
Thanks, Sid. So I have this ambitious idea to improve the GitLab upgrade experience for self-managed customers and users. I was thinking this might be accomplished with some combination of safety checks in the product or the package we ship when you install GitLab, or maybe with clearly defined and discoverable best practices I know we do have upgrade documentation, and I have worked on improving that recently, but I guess my primary goal would just be making updating GitLab easier and smoother for those who can't keep up with our release schedule. I find folks who have a gap in upgrades for whatever reason, especially if it goes across a major version, this is where most of the problems pop up. And GitLab support provides live upgrade assistance to any customer who has this problem. We do request some advance notice and an upgrade plan that they provide to review. I'd like to shorten that advance notice time frame and reduce the burden of like providing a plan that will work on our customers. And I also think this would help open source software and education program members and partners, as they don't have access to live upgrade assistance, but they will be upgrading their self-managed GitLab instances. So I guess my question is, I can propose ideas. I'm not sure how to scope this or what a merge request to resolve this would look like. So what can I do to get this started?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Based on what you described, I think that there's three elements to it. One of it is more safety checks, more automated safety checks before the upgrade happens. The second thing is shorter notice for the people who are already entitled to live upgrade assistance. And the third is expanding the live upgrade assistance to open source projects. I think all three are great proposals, and I encourage you to submit them. And more safety checks is probably an epic in whatever does our upgrades, probably our main code base. Shorter notice is probably customer facing documentation upgrade, like probably we specify somewhere how far in advance we want the upgrade. And the open source projects is probably somewhere in the hand and customer facing, where we specify what we offer the open source projects. So that will be the three MRs I'd split it in. Marin, any suggestions from you?
I would actually be really curious to first find out what prevents the customers from keeping up with the upgrade cycle. Yes, there is some requirements that people need to go through to actually upgrade as well, organizational or time-wise. But I would be curious to find out like whether there is just a point of them not taking the time to do it, or whether something is preventing them from our side. So I would like to find that out first as well, before venturing into resolving a problem that I don't really fully understand, right? Like, you know it best as a support engineer, right? Like you're seeing it, but is there a way for you to draw a line and say, these are the buckets of problems that we are seeing. So let's see how we can state them first, see who owns what. Maybe some things are related for engineering, some things are related to product marketing and so on. And this way you can actually work on figuring which bucket of work might belong to you specifically. Unless I'm misunderstanding the question you're asking here, but that's how I would approach it.
I really appreciate the feedback from both of you. And speaking to Marin, I think it's a good idea to really describe the problem and what is preventing folks from upgrading before we invest too much time into it. From support, I would say the number one thing is network restrictions. If you don't have persistent internet access, it is difficult to pull in package updates on a regular cadence. Another would be that companies have a maintenance time frame in which they upgrade their GitLab instance, and it's not during business hours. They have to schedule that in advance, and it's sometimes monthly, sometimes less than monthly, that they can fit that into their schedule. That would be a restriction on their end of things. Some more like up to chancing, if a GitLab administrator duty is transferred from one customer's employee to another, it could take that customer some time to get their new admin up to speed and updating. Yeah, so I think I'd like to discuss this further, capture some of these ideas. What would an MVC or like good first step to do that look like?
So if I think about, obviously you cannot handle the situation with people who have network separation, right? Like you can't resolve that immediately. And the scheduling is really hard. If you have in one of those buckets, things like people don't upgrade because they missed the date, right? Like they're not looking at the calendar every day, like 22nd, right? You would want to focus on, well, how can we give them a notification in a more structured way? So the way, again, like the way I would start this work is with interviewing the customers, collecting that data, and just based on that, figuring out where you can start, because it would be really hard for you to resolve this problem in one go, in one epic, in one merge request. You would probably want to describe this as a general problem that more than one customer has, so that you know what kind of value you're bringing with the work you're going to do. Right? It's probably not going to be one merge request or one epic. It's going to be a mix of both and many of those.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all great. I will think of next steps here.
So Greg, one thing you said really resonated, like people in offline environments are less likely to upgrade, have more problems keeping up to date. And we know that those people tend to be some of our best customers. I looked at our offline documentation and it says how to install GitLab, but it doesn't say how to update GitLab. You can't use our regular package server for that. So I think that might be a very interesting first approach to add, like, hey, how do I update my offline installation to better documentation? Maybe we have it and we just need to link it from this page, but it could very well be we don't have it. And it could be as simple like, look, download these dep packages and then do this apt-get command to update the installation. It's probably not hard, but it would be good to have it documented.
You can also, there is something that just popped in my head. The Omnibus package specifically has a cron inside of it. There is no reason why we couldn't ship a cron setting that will automatically throw a log message or something like that to tell you like, hey, it's 22nd of the month, check out the new release. And that doesn't have to be pointing to or calling home, because obviously they can't, but it can give you a notice, hey, you should do something about this. That can be a merge request.
The advantages of a fixed release date. No need to call home to know that GitLab is released. Greg, you also have 0.7. This is fun. That's for support for a day.
Oh yeah. So this is actually inspired by a conversation I had with Matt Mullenweg of Automatic at Contribute 2019. I got to meet him and we talked about how he does at WordPress. Everybody who's onboarded does their first 2 weeks in support, and there's an annual expectation that they'll also work in support somewhat after that. I was thinking, well, one of the reasons I really like support is because I feel like it gives me a really good overall understanding. I get to understand the product. I get to understand the customers, their needs, their use cases, what's important to them. And I think that we could share this experience with others outside of the support team. I was wondering how to go about setting something like this up, maybe like a support for a day program where a team member outside support volunteers some working hours to learn about and dive into what supporting GitLab customers looks like.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. I would make it even smaller because a day-long Zoom call is draining. So I would say support for half a day and you just shadow someone. You don't get access to any systems. The support engineer agrees to screen share, and you, if you're not too annoying, you get to ask questions at certain times. That would be the simplest thing. I don't think we need to make any system changes. We don't have to ask permissions. It's just two people that Zoom call for a couple of hours. And by the way, it sounds great. I'd like to participate.
Dan is mentioning also an Sre Shadow Model, the item that we have in infrastructure already, where people do participate in infra-related tasks. So we have something like this. Thanks, Dan, for writing it down. I just want to also say that one of the worst and best experiences I had at GitLab was working with support, or working on support, which allowed me to understand the frustration of our customers and make things better for them once I stopped doing support. So I would absolutely love to do this, and let me know how I can help out to make it happen.
Thanks everybody for the support. I will take action on this. This sounds great. Thanks.
Awesome. Kristen, I think you're going to show us how you're doing iteration instead of asking a question, which is awesome.
Going to, yeah, show and tell, I guess, ask for your feedback on this. This is very rough. This is just from a couple of days of conversations in terms of how we're looking at like the next big leap to take for designs. And I wanted to get your opinion on that. So we can either keep going deep kind of on the issue, which is the first section, iterate by maybe making every attachment work like a design, or we could decide to go broad right now and like move it out to epics, MRs, and other areas of the app. So the MVCs I've got there are all mostly around staying local on GitLab issues, but I was curious to see if you had any ideas on breaking this down further or making it even smaller chunks. And then also if you agree with that growth, like going deeper on the issue before moving out broadly, or if you had a different perspective.
Cool, let's, maybe you can demonstrate. And by the way, it was a few days ago that for the first time I clicked on a design or an image upload, and I could go to the next one without closing my window and opening the next one. That was super exciting.
Nice. So it wasn't working for you before, the left-right arrows?
Yeah, well, or I just didn't discover them or whatever,
oh, okay.
But it works now as it should. So
yeah, you can use the arrows too on your keyboard to go between.
Cool. Good tip. Can you maybe, can maybe show to make this come alive a bit more? I have a hard time wrapping my head around it.
Yeah, so the first one, I did link, there's a link there to wireframe where this is sort of what we're talking about. When we rolled out designs, we actually had a bug where all attachments were becoming designs, and we got a really big spike, which was a bug. But it made us think, hey, what if attachments also were treated this way? And we gave you kind of the full screen view. Maybe you posted a screenshot in a comment. You could just look at it there, but if you click it and open it, you could also interact with it as if it is a design.
It makes sense to me.
Yep. So in this case, the area below issue description would be small, like the one on the left is where it's collapsed. But we would essentially aggregate down below designs, pulling up every screenshot and every comment or throughout the whole issue. So you've got them there to easily reference them, but you could also potentially drag them up and make them a versioned design as well as part of like a normal design flow. This would get more of the personas like engineers, PMs. Like the goal would be to just everyone who uses attachments in some way would get the feature set that come with designs. So that's,
yeah, I don't understand what the trade-off is, but this sounds good to me.
okay. I think the trade-off would, I guess the major trade-off in this would be, should we keep iterating on in the smaller market of a GitLab issue and growing it there before moving this out onto other real estate?
The other real estate is like merge requests?
Epics, merge requests, basically anywhere else you can do, like where you're posting screenshots or embedding them within text.
Yeah, I think like merge requests are at least twice as heavily used as issues.
Yeah.
So, and your whole thing is get your Gmail up, your future Gmail up. So I think makes sense. I think the biggest bang for the buck would be to just launch what you have today on merge requests. I think that will triple your usage numbers. So I'd go for that.
Okay, that makes sense. And then we'll keep some of the other MVCs I had there were like the draw.io, which we talked about. Other integrations, that's the other side, is finding the right tools for the right persona and then letting you basically post any type of asset through this system.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And I wouldn't call it an integration with draw.io. I would just, hey, you can make diagrams in GitLab now. Yeah, on the back end, it uses the draw.io JavaScript, but it's just a GitLab diagram. And I don't even know that I'm using draw.io libraries. It's just native GitLab functionality.
Okay. Yeah, I think our integrations would be the ones that are posting from an external app, and then the ones that are embedded will start saying like, are the actual feature.
Yeah, I think the Figma integration was a big success, but I think something like diagrams is so basic that I think it should be innate in GitLab. And hey, actually, look, if you replicate Figma and just make it part of GitLab, I'm not complaining. I think, however, that seems like a lot of work, so it's probably not in scope right now. So that's fine. But since Draw.io is just embed this extra JavaScript framework, seems like something we can easily do. Well, easily do. That's
well,
I don't have to program it, so it's easy for me to say.
We'll get that scoped for sure. The team's looking at it right now to see about bringing that package in.
And the context is an integration gets an order of magnitude or 2 order of magnitudes less usage than something that just is on by default in GitLab. Yeah. So if you have the option, always just make it native functionality.
Yeah. We're asking Figma to allow us to do an edit because they have the in-browser experience, but they don't have that on their roadmap. They don't have any other partners doing like an embed in another product. So that's probably a ways out, but we are asking for that. So, okay, well, this was good feedback. I'll talk to the team as well. The moving to other stages does have a lot of architecture under it. We have to decouple designs from issues before we do that. So I'll have to figure out whether we could do one of the MVCs on the first one and then start the re-architecture to move to MRs.
Cool, yeah. And issues are not heavily used, so I wouldn't prioritize that. I'd go for a merge request to pump the numbers.
Thank you.
Cool, well, this was a really enjoyable session. Marin, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I can only say that I also enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot as well. So thanks everyone for your time, and till next time.